Hey, good morning, guys. Welcome back to our Vietnam War lecture series. Welcome back to Monday. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed the great weather this weekend. I know Saturday was beautiful. Sunday, a little overcast, but still got warm, so it's nice to get outside and enjoy the weather. And so, hopefully, you guys got to experience that. You're probably wondering to yourself, "Oh my gosh, is it Friday? Did I sleep through the whole week?" No, it is Monday, but as I tend to do as we get into May, I start to get a little bit more casual in what I dress. Now, obviously, I don't know if I wear this to school, just an Under Armour shirt, but more of my collared baseball shirts and things like that. So I think I'm done with the shirt and ties for the year. They've been retired until next fall. So when you see me next fall, and you're a junior walking down the hallways, you'll see my great outfits, and you can remark about how they coordinate so well with patterns and things like that. So it's going to be a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more casual as we go through the Vietnam War here and we finish up our work. We only really have about 2 more weeks, and then after that, you guys have a week to work on your own. And so we will be kind of getting through the Vietnam War, and then you guys will be looking at some stuff on your own post 1970s. So without further ado, get your notes out and let's get started where we left off. So last time in the Vietnam War, we talked about how the war kind of escalated and some of the areas in which the war grew. So one thing that we're going to talk about today is we're going to look at how it now becomes an American war. Because remember, it was the first Indochina War. And during the first Indochina War, it was France and Vietnam. But then France leaves, and the United States can't help France because we're in Korea. We're fighting our own war somewhere else. Now that France has left, and we don't want Vietnam to fall, we don't want that dominoes to fall of Southeast Asia, we then get involved in South Vietnam and helping the South Vietnamese fight off their two enemies. Remember, there are two enemies that we're facing in the Vietnam War. The Viet Minh, which are the North Vietnamese, named after their leader, Ho Chi Minh. And then the VC, or the Viet Cong. And this is, if you've watched any of the documentaries that talked about, they talk about the Viet Cong all the time because this is a very elusive enemy that we'll talk about today, how they were elusive, some of the ways that they eluded capture, and they fought the United States and the ARVN forces of the South. But, imagine trying to fight a war and the people around you are your enemies, and they're integrated into your fighting unit. So as you move throughout South Vietnam, it's not like, oh, you're in the South, so it's safe. Most of the time when you go fight a war, if you're with people around your occupied areas that you control, those are people that you can trust. Well, you can't trust anyone around you, so it's really hard to tell friend from foe, especially because being one nation, the South Vietnamese and the North Vietnamese are the same people, right? It's the same country. And so it's hard to tell the distinction between who are South Vietnamese soldiers, who are Viet Cong soldiers, and who are Viet Minh soldiers. Because the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong really don't wear uniforms. And so that makes it even harder for our fighting forces. But let's go ahead and get into the notes. So in an American war, how do we Americanize this? Well, we did talk about how we started bombing along the 17th parallel in coastal cities with Operation Rolling Thunder. Post the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. The United States took over the main responsibility for fighting the war, and we took a two-pronged strategy into Vietnam. And this is a strategy we're going to try and use so that we are successful. First, U.S. Marines would take key cities and other vital sites along the coast. Why do we want to do this? Think back to like the Anaconda Plan in the Civil War. If you control the coastal cities, then they can't get any imports from any type of allies. So, we're trying to cut them off from the Soviet Union, from China. So we're going to try and control the waterway, which should be easy because obviously we have a navy, and the North Vietnamese, they don't have a navy. The only problem is they share a common border with China. So China can get in vital resources and supplies and reinforcements through their common border, and they don't have to send it through the ocean. We want to take these key cities and make them into bases. So this is kind of like World War II. When we did our island hopping in the South Pacific, we would go from one area to another, creating bases at the areas that we occupied as we continued to move towards the much harder target, which was the capital city of Tokyo in World War II, and here it would be trying to get all the way up into Ho Chi Minh City. 2, use those bases to launch search and destroy missions against the Viet Cong. Now, this is a new type of fighting, search and destroy. Pretty much it's this. We're going to send out platoons of soldiers to go seek out the enemy and kill the enemy. It's not so much, hey, we're going to move our troops to take over this part of land or this bridge or to occupy this city. It's no. How many Viet Cong and North Vietnamese can we kill? So the way we're judging our success in this war is by kill count. Something that we've never really done before. But we look and say, if we kill more communists than Americans die, then we are having success in this war. And so that's really hard to determine because, we've talked about before, the hardest war to fight is an ideological war. Why is that? Because you have to kill everyone with that idea to kill the idea, right? Because if there is any communist still alive in the North, that communist ideology will still live on and then will continue to spread. That's why we go with search and destroy missions. Americanization of the Vietnam War from South Vietnam was also something that we wanted to start. We want to make sure that we are fighting an Americanized war. What does that mean? Using our tanks, using long-range artillery, using our Air Force, using our Navy, using our tactics. We don't want to fight their war, but we kind of get sucked into that guerrilla warfare of the North Vietnamese. So, facing frustration in Vietnam. The United States was stuck in Vietnam with no easy way out. Great song from the 1980s. If you've seen Rocky IV, it's in the video montage, No Easy Way Out. No? Look it up. It's a really good song. They counseled Johnson to cut back on bombing, reduce troop levels, and pursue negotiations. So early on, we realized that this is going to be a long, tedious war. It's not going to be a war that can be easily won. There's going to be a lot of casualties. And so the United States kind of looks at Johnson and they're like, hey, maybe we should look for an exit strategy. Maybe we shouldn't be involved in this conflict. In 1963, most Americans still supported the president's efforts to contain communism in Vietnam. By 1968, Americans said the war was out of control, and they started nicknaming this Johnson's War. So, look in 5 years, everyone's, Cold War is going on, we need to stop communism, this is all after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and now all of a sudden in 1968, we've had this movement in the United States, this counterculture movement, and all of a sudden it's Johnson's War, and we shouldn't be in Vietnam, and what are the Americans doing? We're warmongers, and you really have this divided society. Today being May 4th, this is the anniversary of the Kent State shootings, which represents that divided society. So if you have a chance, you should check out some of the stuff that's on today that talk about the Kent State shootings. We'll talk about that later in our notes, but today is the anniversary of that event. It didn't matter what was happening at home. Approval ratings for the war continued to drop, and approval ratings for Johnson continued to drop. Remember, think about all the great things he did domestically. But because it got us in a war that a lot of people didn't like, Johnson's overall approval starts to drop. And that's really going to weigh on the president because he is doing a lot of good things for civil rights, all right, for equal sexes, all right, through the Supreme Court. But because of his want to be strong against communism and to flex American muscle in the containment doctrine, it's causing a lot of people to become upset with what Johnson's strategy is in Vietnam. Here are some photos that you start seeing that become more prevalent in American society. Pictures of American caskets coming back from Vietnam. Before this, any war, we didn't have media coverage overseas in the conflict. And any coverage we did have was coming from the military. So it was always pro-American, pro-military, showing all the great things that were happening. Now all of a sudden, the media is capturing everything, the good and the ugly. And when these images start coming back, it really starts to hit home about the loss of life. And what's crazy to think about is, compared to other conflicts we've been in prior to this, in Vietnam, yes, we lose a lot of Americans, over 50,000, but that's nowhere comparable to World War I or World War II, and it's a longer war. But because the images are there on the nightly news and people are seeing them in the newspaper, it starts to cast a shadow of doubt on why we're there and what we're fighting for. And this is where you're starting to see that outrage about the war to Johnson. Fighting in unfamiliar territory. Something that's a little bit different about Vietnam than anywhere we fought before, besides some places in the South Pacific, Hot and humid conditions, 90 degrees much of the year, and heavy monsoon rains from May to October. It's unfortunate, but we won't get to watch Forrest Gump together. But if you've seen Forrest Gump, his time while he's in Vietnam, he talks about it raining. He's like, one day it just started raining. And it rained, and it rained, and it sideways rained. It rained from the ground up. It rained heavy rain. And he just talks about all this rain for like 3 months. Well, that was the monsoon season. And then he's like, and then it's like someone just turned off the sprinkler, and it stopped. And that's really what it was like. So American soldiers had to get used to this type of fighting in the rice paddy fields, fighting in jungle-clad mountains. And so it's just drastically different for us. Diseases like malaria spread because of all the bugs and mosquitoes. So this was something that was a major problem and a major killer of American soldiers. Soggy lowland rice paddies, swamps over steep and jungle-clad mountains. And the North Vietnamese concealed themselves extremely well. The U.S. sprayed this new thing called Agent Orange, which exposed civilians and soldiers to toxins that pose long-term health risks. Think of Agent Orange as like Roundup or something you spray on weeds at your house. It says on the bottle, like, do not ingest this, do not get it in your eyes. If you do, call poison control, right? Well, we are dropping pretty much like Roundup all over the jungle because we're trying to kill the vegetation, because if the vegetation dies, then it's easier for our soldiers to see. The only problem is that's getting in the waterways, and it's the water that our soldiers are drinking. It's in the air, our soldiers are breathing it in, and sometimes they're dropping it too close to the soldiers. So they start to go away from Agent Orange, and the other two areas that they try and make up for this is one, napalm. They're going to try and burn the jungles. Or guys that are carrying flamethrowers, and they'll burn the jungles that way to try and get the enemy to come out. Engaging an elusive enemy. We engage in guerrilla warfare with our search and destroy missions. Our enemy hid from the American pursuers in underground tunnels. These tunnels had several exits, very elaborate. Some of them even have living spaces. So some of these soldiers, for the Americans, became termed as tunnel rats. These tunnel rats would be part of platoons or units, and they were used to crawl through and go through the tunnels. This is a job that caused a lot of PTSD because you're in this dark tunnel, you have no idea where the enemy is, then all of a sudden there were these surprises that would come out, you booby traps. And so you really didn't want to be a tunnel rat, but if you were a short, skinny guy, you usually could fit in these tunnels, and so those were the tunnel rats. The U.S. cannot tell friend from foe because the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, and the South Vietnamese all look the same, they all dress the same. The U.S. tried to counter with a war of attrition. The strategy was for search and destroy missions, which made the U.S. combat soldiers clear targets for the enemies. We are trying to draw them out. We want them to come fight us. Get out of your tunnels, get out of hiding, fight us in an open field, because in an open field, we have more superior weapons, and we're better trained. We're better soldiers. But if we're fighting your war, and we have to go find you in these tunnels and dig you out, then we're not going to be successful. We want the enemy, the Viet Minh, the Viet Cong, so we can use our air superiority, and that's the biggest thing. How can we use our bombing to be the most effective tool possible? What ends up happening is some of our bombing, we get killed in friendly fire because they end up bombing too close to the American soldiers out in the field. Real quick, the last thing for today is you'll see an image on the next slide, and it shows kind of the intricate tunnel system that the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong use. We talked about the Ho Chi Minh Trail going through Cambodia and Laos, getting supplies into the south. Well, they continued these tunnels in the south, and so that their troops can move. So, by day, here they are as a farmer. Then at night, they go get in the tunnel. They grab their weapon. They go behind enemy lines, and they start attacking Americans. They go back through the tunnel. They hang out for a few days. They go back to their farm, and they start farming again. And it's really hard to tell who is your enemy in this situation. So this was a very effective method for the North Vietnamese as well as the Viet Cong to use against the United States in the Vietnam War. That's it for Monday. Continue working on your reading questions. Hopefully you guys saw that we're done with our quizzes. So there's no more vocab quizzes. Yeah. All right. So all you have is your reading questions. Continue to work on those, and we'll have some more discussion boards later this week. So hopefully you enjoyed this lecture. Tune back in tomorrow for our Part 3 lecture over the Vietnam War. But other than that, have a great Monday, guys. Enjoy the weather. I know it's a little bit chillier today. But have a great day. Have a great Monday. Go Pacers. See you.